The last letter from Maple Street. It was a cold December evening in a small town in Ohio. Snow had started falling just before sunset, covering the quiet streets with a thin white blanket. The old streetlights flickered in the freezing wind, and most of the houses had already closed their curtains for the night. At the end of Maple Street stood a small abandoned house. It had been empty for almost 15 years. The paint had faded. The windows were dusty. The front porch made strange noises whenever the wind blew. People in the neighborhood rarely talked about the house. But everyone knew one thing. The house belonged to an old man named Samuel Carter. Samuel had disappeared one winter night 15 years earlier. No one knew where he had gone. Some believed he had left town. Others believed he had died somewhere far away. But nobody had ever found him. And nobody had ever discovered what happened to the letters he used to leave in his mailbox. Chapter 1. The new neighbor. 27-year-old Evan Miller moved to Maple Street on a Friday afternoon. He had recently lost his job in Chicago and decided to return to his hometown. Evan wasn't expecting much. He wanted a quiet place where he could start over. His new apartment was a small upstairs room above an old grocery store. It wasn't beautiful, but it was affordable. That night, Evan walked outside to buy some food. As he passed the abandoned house, he noticed something unusual. There was an envelope lying on the sidewalk. Evan picked it up. It was old. The paper was yellow and slightly damaged. On the front, written in faded black ink, were 4 words: "For the person who finds this." Evan looked around. The street was empty. He turned the envelope over. There was no name. No address, just a small blue mark in the corner. He almost threw it away, but curiosity stopped him. He opened the envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper. There were only 3 sentences. "If you were reading this, I never made it home. Please don't let my story disappear. The truth is hidden where the winter light touches the old clock." Evan read it twice. Then a third time. He looked toward the abandoned house. There was an old clock visible through one of the dusty windows. Evan felt a strange chill, not because of the cold, but because he suddenly wondered if the letter had been written recently. Chapter 2. The old clock. The next morning, Evan went to the local library. He asked the librarian about Samuel Carter. The librarian, Mrs. Wilson, was an elderly woman who had lived in Maple Street for more than 50 years. When Ethan mentioned Samuel's name, her expression changed. "You shouldn't be digging into that story," she said quietly. "Why?" Mrs. Wilson looked toward the library window. "Because some stories don't want to be remembered." Ethan smiled nervously. "I'm not trying to cause trouble. I just found a letter." Mrs. Wilson became completely silent. "What kind of letter?" Ethan showed it to her. She stared at the handwriting. Then she whispered, "That's Samuel's handwriting." Evan's heart started beating faster. "But this letter was found yesterday." Mrs. Wilson slowly sat down. "That's impossible." "Why?" "Because Samuel wrote his final letter 15 years ago." Evan looked confused. "Final letters?" Mrs. Wilson nodded. "He came into this library 3 days before he disappeared. He told me that someone was trying to take something from him." "What?" "I never found out." "Did he say who?" Mrs. Wilson shook her head. "He only told me one thing." "What?" She looked directly into Ethan's eyes. "If anything happens to me, tell them to look behind the old clock." Chapter 3. The house. That afternoon, Ethan stood outside Samuel's abandoned house. The front door was locked, but one of the side windows was broken. Ethan hesitated. He knew entering an abandoned house wasn't a good idea, but the letter had been waiting for someone, and now he had found it. He carefully stepped inside. The house smelled like dust and old wood. The furniture was still there: a chair beside the fireplace, an old dining table, a bookshelf filled with yellowing newspapers, and on the wall, the clock. It was enormous, almost 6 feet tall. Its hands had stopped at 11:17. Ethan walked toward it. He remembered the letter. The truth is hidden where the winter light touches the old clock. A beam of afternoon sunlight entered through the window and touched the floor beside the clock, and then moved the clock slightly. Behind it was a small wooden box. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was a photograph. Three people stood in front of a small factory. Samuel Carter, a younger man, and a woman Ethan recognized immediately. His mother. Ethan froze. His mother had died when he was 10. She had never mentioned Samuel Carter. He turned the photograph over. On the back was a handwritten message. They promised they would protect us. Below it was a date. December 17, 1998. Ethan stared at the date. It was almost exactly 28 years earlier. Read Chapter 4. A secret from the past. Ethan rushed home and called his father. His father answered after several rings. "Dad, I need to ask you something." "What happens?" "Do you know Samuel Carter?" There was silence, a long silence. Then his father said, "Where did you hear that name?" "I found a photograph." Another silence. "Ethan, listen to me. Leave that house." "What? Just leave it." "Dad, my mother knew him." His father took a deep breath. "Your mother worked at that factory." "What factory?" "The Carter Textile Mill." Ethan sat down. "Why didn't you ever tell Meg?" "Because your mother didn't want you to know." "Know what?" His father's voice became quieter. "There was an accident." "What kind of accident?" "Several workers became sick after chemicals were dumped into the river." Ethan remembered the photograph. "And Samuel's. He tried to expose the company." "Did he disappear because of that?" "I don't know. You do know something?" His father didn't answer. Finally he said, "Your mother helped Samuel." Then the phone went silent. Chapter 5. The second letter. That night, Ethan returned to the abandoned house. He searched the room again. Under the old floorboards, he discovered another envelope. This one had his name on it. Ethan. His hands became cold. He opened it. The letter was dated 15 years ago. Samuel had written, "Dear Ethan, you don't know me, but I knew your mother. She was one of the bravest people I ever met. When the factory owners tried to silence the workers, she refused to stay quiet. We collected evidence, documents, photographs, names, everything. But before we could take it to the authorities, someone discovered what we were doing. Your mother begged me to hide the evidence. I did. If you are reading this, it means the truth still hasn't been found. Look beneath the place where we first met." And then read the final sentence again. "Where we first met." He thought about the photographs, the factory. Then he remembered something his mother used to tell him when he was little. She often took him to an old diner near the river, the Maple Diner. Chapter 6. The diner. The next morning, Ethan visited the diner. It was still there, older now, but almost unchanged. An elderly man named Frank was sitting behind the counter. When Ethan mentioned Samuel Carter, Frank stopped polishing a glass. "You knew him?" Frank nodded. "Everyone knew Samuel." "Where did he meet my mother?" Frank looked at him carefully. "Your mother used to sit in the booth near the window." Ethan walked toward it. Under the table was a small metal plate. He touched it. It moved. Behind it was a narrow compartment. Inside was a key and another note. "The truth is not in the factory. It is where the river remembers." Ethan knew exactly what that meant. The old river warehouse. Chapter 7. The warehouse. The warehouse stood near the river. It had been abandoned for years. Ethan entered just before sunset. The place was dark and quiet. He followed the river-facing wall until he found an old metal door. The key opened it. Inside was a small room. There were boxes everywhere, old documents, newspaper articles, photographs, and dozens of letters. Ethan began reading them. They revealed everything. The factory had illegally dumped chemicals into the river. Several workers had complained. Samuel and Ethan's mother had collected evidence. They planned to take everything to federal investigators. But someone inside the company discovered their plan. Samuel had been threatened. His family had been threatened. And then, one night, Samuel disappeared. But the letters revealed something else. Samuel had not simply run away. He had gone into hiding. He had spent years trying to protect the evidence. Then Ethan found a final envelope. It contained a photograph. Samuel was standing outside a small house in another state. On the back was written, "I am alive, but I cannot return until the truth is safe." Ethan stared at the photograph. Samuel was alive, or at least he had been when the photograph was taken. Chapter 8. The truth. Ethan took the evidence to the authorities. The investigation that followed shocked the entire town. Old records were reopened. Former employees were interviewed. The company, which had long ago changed ownership, was forced to answer questions about what had happened decades earlier. The truth finally became public. But Ethan still had one question. Where was Samuel? Weeks passed. Then, one cold January morning, Ethan received a letter. There was no return address. Inside was a single sentence. "You did what I could not." Below it was a photograph. Samuel, older, his hair completely gray, standing beside a small wooden house. And on the back, "If you want to meet me, come to the place where the road ends." Chapter 9. The road ends. Ethan drove for almost 6 hours. He crossed small towns, frozen fields, and quiet country roads. Eventually, the road became narrower. Then it ended beside a lake. There was a small wooden cabin. Ethan stepped out of the car. An old man opened the door. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then the old man smiled. Ethan nodded. "Samuel." The old man looked toward the frozen lake. "I wondered if someone would eventually find the letters. You could have come home. I wanted to." "Then why didn't you?" Samuel looked down. "Because I was afraid." Ethan was surprised. "You?" Samuel smiled sadly. "Being brave doesn't mean you were never afraid. It means you decide that something else is more important than your fear." Ethan thought about his mother. "She never told me any of this. She wanted you to have a normal childhood. She was brave." "Yes," Samuel said. "Very brave." Chapter 10. The last letter. Before Ethan left, Samuel handed him one final envelope. "This is for you." Ethan opened it in the car. The letter began, "Dear Ethan, if you are reading this, then you already know the truth. But there is something more important than the truth about me. It's the truth about your mother. She believed that one person could make a difference. She was right. You may think your life has fallen apart because you lost your job, because things didn't work out, because you had to start over. But sometimes starting over is not the end of your story. Sometimes it is the beginning. Don't spend your life wondering why one door closed. Look for the door that hasn't opened yet. And when it does, have the courage to walk through it." And then folded the letter. Outside, snow began falling again. Chapter 11. A new beginning. 6 months later, Ethan opened a small community center on Maple Street. He named it the Carter Community House. It helped young people find jobs, learn new skills, and get support when life became difficult. The old abandoned house was restored. The broken windows were replaced. The walls were painted, and the old clock remained exactly where it had always been. At the entrance, Evan placed a small wooden box. Inside was a copy of Samuel's final letter. Above it he placed a simple sentence, "Every life has a story. Never assume you know how it ends." Years later, people in Maple Street still talked about Samuel Carter, but they no longer talked about him as the man who disappeared. They remembered him as the man who refused to let the truth disappear. And Evan remembered his mother, not because of the secrets she had kept, but because of the courage she had shown. Sometimes life takes something away from us, a job, a friendship, a dream, a plan we thought would last forever. And when that happens, it can feel like the road has ended. But sometimes the road ending is exactly what makes us look in another direction. Ethan learned that on a cold winter night in Ohio. He learned that a forgotten letter can change a life. He learned that courage doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes courage is simply telling the truth. Sometimes it is starting again. and sometimes it is opening the door when you have every reason to stay inside. The old clock on Maple Street still works today. Its hands no longer stop at 11:17. Every morning it moves forward, tick by tick, minute by minute. A quiet reminder that no matter how difficult yesterday was, time keeps moving, and so should we. The end.